If the police come in right now and handcuff me and walk me out that door, what are you gonna think? That I did something wrong? Yeah, that's right. That's what we think. The police come, then you're like, what'd he do wrong? Shit, must be bad. Teaching them in a classroom that was too warm for human habitation. Arrested. Yeah, you think somebody's done something wrong. So that's an example that we perceive that something's being done to somebody, and the police come in and are like, ah, yes, that's legit. You can arrest that guy. He must have done something wrong. We don't know what it is yet, but it must be something. We've discovered in recent years, though, that oftentimes, and Weber was writing this from Germany, where in most European societies, they have a much tighter control over weapons. In our society, we have weapons everywhere, so everybody thinks they have legitimate right to do something violent often. But we've discovered that the police tend to exercise violence more than we would like them to, right? Or maybe some people like them to do as much violence as they want. But that's been one of the reasons that people have been protesting various things over the last 30 years or so, is because it looks like there are people that are getting violently arrested and shot that don't seem to have really done anything or don't seem to have merited that treatment. Or last year, there were student protests in which people were getting handcuffed and arrested, and professors would be like, hey, what are you doing? Then they'd get arrested. And so you do wonder, where is there a heavy police presence and where is that perceived as legitimate? This is also one of the reasons why, at least for some people, it was so shocking when people are storming the Capitol building, because the state is supposed to be the ones that are keeping order in a society. You're not supposed to have people taking that into their own hands and running over the police. It's crazy. So these things are actually in debate in many societies. They seem to be especially in debate in our own society, because who is going to have a monopoly on violence that is perceived as legitimate? Where does state power, or how is state power perceived as legitimate or not? And this is where the term hegemony comes in. Hegemony is a big word. And if you look it up in the dictionary, a lot of people just use it as a synonym for power. But in the social sciences, if you hang around anthropology and sociology and different places, hegemony has a more specific definition, which is, yes, it's a form of power, but it's a form of power through basically consent. Like, we agree that that's the way things should be. And so there's power that is, when you go in and you beat somebody up, that's explicitly going in and dominating somebody. That's one form of power. But if you have to pull that out on somebody, then you probably don't have this other more subtle form of power, which is better to have, which is you just agree that that's the way things should be. And so hegemony is achieved because people in society share certain norms, legitimating discourses. Hey, if you got arrested, it must be because you did something wrong. And historical narratives. A lot of people use the word hegemony as simply a bigger word or a synonym for power, but it's taken now to be this idea that you have power, an elite group has power, but people agree with what's going on. One of the things that happens in a society where they have hegemony is that the people on the bottom of a social hierarchy, for example, are not necessarily rebelling against the people at the top. And in fact, they might feel like that's the natural order of things. That's the way things should be. Or maybe they feel like they can be a person at the top if they just work hard enough. So hegemony is one way in which people govern or might rule over others, but try to establish that as that's the way things should be, that's the way things always have been, appeals to tradition. Now, the word hegemony actually comes to us from an Italian philosopher named Antonio Gramsci. Great thing about some of these words now is if you want to get somebody to tell you about hegemony, you just go on YouTube and you can get Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony explained to you. Gramsci was, again, an Italian theorist. Sadly, look, he didn't live very long. He was in poor health, and he spent about the last 20 years of his life in prison. And so he wrote a lot of these things down, a lot of his ideas, including the idea of hegemony, in a series of volumes that were published after he died called The Prison Notebooks. Now, Gramsci was in prison, note the years there, and at the time of the rise of Mussolini in Italy. So you had a fascist dictator rising, and Gramsci had the unfortunate choice that he made to be an organizer for the socialists and the communists. So he was trying to create a revolution, and the fascists threw him in jail, and that's where he came up with this idea of hegemony. But the reason why he was thinking about hegemony is because he was thinking, what the heck am I doing in prison? We have this very unequal society. The people on the bottom are getting screwed over by the people at the top, and yet people aren't rising up. They're not rebelling. They're not creating the revolution that I want to create. So the idea of hegemony was his way of trying to explain why it was that people can have power and the revolution isn't forthcoming. The other thing that's nice about today's world is you can buy all these things as little posters and stuff. So one time a student bought me this. If you go to my office, we can check out the That's Hegemony Baby poster. But it's interesting because what it means is that even something like Gramsci, consumer culture has become so hegemonic that in order to rebel, you have to put it on a t-shirt or put it on a poster. And so even somebody who is trying to create the revolution is now being used to sell capitalist stuff. You wanted more examples of hegemony. So I just gave you one, Italy. Italy in some ways was a society in which the elite had hegemony over the population. What's another society in which people seem to have everybody's buying into the system, even if they're not necessarily benefiting from it? How many of you think you're going to be a billionaire? No goals? Nobody? Nobody thinks they're going to be a billionaire? We have a society in which we have a very large number, well, a very small number, but a too large number, I would say, of billionaires who are owning lots of our society, buying stuff, buying votes, buying all kinds of stuff all over the place. And yet none of you believe that you're going to be a billionaire. Why haven't you revolutioned yet? You don't think you're going to be a billionaire, and the billionaires are basically running things, and you haven't done anything about it. But I'm very sad that I'm not a billionaire. I still have hopes. That's the thing about America. Even the people on the bottom of things think that they might make it. It might be around the corner. Nick wanted me to explain cryptocurrency. I can't explain cryptocurrency. That wasn't in the chapter, but that's one of the lures. That's one of the things that we have. Like, if I just get into enough crypto, I'm going to be able to make it in society. Does that work out? Some people, it might work out for a few. That's the whole lure of this thing. They made it. I might be able to too. So I would say that the United States is the elites in the United States are perhaps one of the best examples of hegemony that we have in the world, because we all believe that we're going to be making it. Most of us aren't, but here we are. Just get good grades, might be a billionaire. So this brings us, this is a good example of what happens in modern urban life and the enormous inequalities that are not just in our society, but in other parts of the world as well. This is actually a picture from Sao Paulo in Brazil, which has is still one of the most unequal societies in the world. You can see on the one side, you have this neighborhood of people, and then on the other side, there's a big wall and an apartment building with a tennis court and a swimming pool, and you can bet that those people are not going back and forth there from one neighborhood to the other. So your textbook talks about how people are using informal justice. They've probably been left out of the state system. The police in Brazil are notoriously violent toward in these poor neighborhoods. And so you would never even want to call the police if you lived in one of these places, but you would have self-regulating systems or ways to keep your community safe and self-governed outside of the formal justice system, which is often prejudiced against the people who live in these communities. But as your book notes, the elites, the people at the top, are also using self-governance in order to protect themselves and their stuff and keep the other people outside and keep them away from their stuff. Wait, do we have any of these in our society? Maybe not as dramatic. Wait, how many of you have met a billionaire face to face? It's hard to get to the billionaires. Don't even know where they are. Or you see them, but way far away. You don't even get to rub shoulders with them anymore. In the olden days, you'd had the rich guy in town, but you'd at least know where he was. You knew where the rich people lived. These days, there may be often fortified enclaves, is what your book describes this as. So to a lesser degree, we have these in the form of gated communities. You have a gate there, and only the people that have enough money to be behind the gate are living there. But if you're truly rich today, then you get an island, buy some big boat and float around on it, and go into space, float around space for a while. That's where the rich have gone. So we end up in this situation where we may not even see the rich. Billionaires are gone. They're not even here anymore. Don't see them. Fortified enclaves. So I want to wrap back to our deep assumptions that you wrote down at the very beginning. A lot of the answers that archaeology and anthropology has are perhaps not as satisfying as we would want them to be and able to explain big theories about these. But there is one general point about shaking up these deep assumptions, is that if things have been different before, and if human societies are not necessarily as unequal as they are now, and if societies are able to self-govern without having certain people going around shooting other people all the time, then our own society doesn't necessarily have to be the way it is. It doesn't need to be the way it is. It can be different than it is. Or, as Antonio Gramsci put it, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. Just weird that he wrote this 100 years ago. The old world has been dying for a long time and the new world is still struggling to be born. There seems to be big monsters around again, but it seems particularly applicable to what's going on in certain societies in the world, where we have the rise again of people who admire fascist dictators and want to throw other people in jail. There they'll be. That's hegemony, baby.